What would you do if an HOA president marched onto your land, claimed your lake was theirs, and started sending landscapers and compliance officers like they owned you? Most people would give in, too scared to fight, but not me, because this lake, every drop of water and every inch of land around it, is mine, and I was ready to prove it, no matter how far they pushed. Before I start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I was yanking a stubborn root from the edge of my lake when I heard the unmistakable screech of golf cart tires on gravel. I didn't even have to turn around to know who it was. Priscilla Markley, the HOA president of the neighboring subdivision. Sun visor tilted like a crown and a clipboard clutched in both hands like a holy relic. "This is private property," she barked before her cart even rolled to a stop. I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Sure is mine." Her eyes narrowed like she just found a weed in her petunia bed. "You're not on the HOA registry. You're not a member of Willow Creek Estates." "That's because I'm not in Willow Creek Estates," I replied. "I own this land and this lake." She blinked. "You what?" I pointed to the wooden sign I'd carved and mounted years ago. "Orrin Asher Lake, private property, no trespassing. Bought the lake and the surrounding 70 acres 10 years ago. I've got the deed, surveys, and receipts." Priscilla's nostrils flared. "That can't be. This lake backs up to several of our homeowners' properties. That makes it common use." "No, it doesn't," I said flatly. "They may have a view, but they don't have rights." She stepped off the cart like she was descending from a throne. "Then why was I given jurisdiction over shoreline maintenance?" "Because someone lied to you," I said. "And now you're trespassing," she huffed, flipping through her clipboard. "I have a legal right to inspect all Willow Creek common areas, including bodies of water. That's in our charter. Again, I'm not in your HOA and this isn't your lake. You're stepping on private land." Her tone dropped to that high-pitched fake sweet register that always means trouble. "Well, if you're not in our HOA, then I'm afraid you're in violation of several codes. That fence you installed by the dock, non-compliant. The gravel path, not approved. And the fire pit, oh, that's going to be a problem." I couldn't help but laugh. "You don't get to enforce anything here." She scribbled furiously on a pink slip and slapped it against my mailbox as she left. "You'll be hearing from the compliance committee, Mr. Asher." I watched her disappear around the bend, still shaking my head. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The next morning I woke up to find a huge notice of code violation, signs staked at the foot of my driveway, bright red letters, their stupid HOA logo stamped on the bottom. I pulled it out, tossed it in the truck bed, and figured that would be that. 2 days later, a landscaper showed up and started trimming my hedges without permission. Confronted him, and he claimed he was hired by the HOA to bring the property up to code. That's when I realized Priscilla wasn't just being annoying. She was trying to annex my land. 3 days after the rogue landscaper incident, I installed a motion-activated camera on the big oak facing my driveway. I wasn't about to let anyone else wander onto my property with hedge trimmers like they'd been invited. The camera fed directly to my phone, alerting me whenever someone crossed the property line. That turned out to be a wise move. The following evening, just after sunset, I got an alert. I pulled up the feed and saw a group of 32 men in reflective vests and one woman in a blazer walking around near the dock. The men had measuring wheels and clipboards. The woman had a flashlight and a stack of papers under her arm. I walked down with my flashlight and called out before I got too close. "You're trespassing. I suggest you turn around." The woman turned slowly. It wasn't Priscilla this time. It was someone younger, late 30s maybe, with her hair pulled tight and a smug little tilt to her chin. "We're conducting a boundary assessment," she said. "This is official HOA business." "Your authority ends where my deed begins," I said, stopping just short of the gravel. "You're on private land. I have you on camera, and if you don't leave, I'll call the sheriff." She didn't flinch. "Sir, the HOA has received multiple complaints about non-compliant structures along this shoreline. We have a duty to ensure safety and uniformity. You have a duty to stay on your own property." I snapped. "Now get off mine." One of the men flipped his clipboard closed and muttered, "Let's go." They stomped back up the hill without another word. I waited until their taillights disappeared before heading back inside. I'd been patient, but it was clear now they weren't going to stop. The next morning, I drove into town and filed a trespassing complaint with the county sheriff's office. While I was there, I asked to meet with Deputy Carla Brenner. She was a friend of a friend and had a reputation for dealing with land disputes without taking sides. She sat across from me at the station break room, flipping through the documents I handed her. "You've got everything in order. Deed, tax records, plats, looks clean. Then why are they acting like they own it?" I asked. Carla leaned back in her chair. "Some of these HOAs think they can expand their reach just by pretending they have already got it. They scare off enough people nobody questions it." I tapped the edge of the table. "What happens if they file something with the county trying to claim jurisdiction? They'd have to submit a boundary amendment or annexation request that goes through the county planning board, not the HOA. You'd be notified. Could they do it without me knowing?" Carla hesitated. "Not legally, but I've seen groups like this try to shortcut the process." That was enough for me. I left the station and drove straight to the county records office. Sure enough, there it was, an application filed under Willow Creek HOA expansion proposal dated 2 weeks prior. I asked the clerk for a copy and read it right there at the counter. The proposal claimed that the lake and its immediate environmental buffer zone were part of a shared watershed that had historically been maintained under the stewardship of the Willow Creek HOA. There were no signatures from neighboring landowners, just a typed list of impacted parties. And my name was right there. The nerve. Back home, I pulled my files and typed up a written objection, citing the original land surveys and the precise legal description in my deed. I sent it via certified mail to the planning board and requested a hearing. 1 week later, I got the appointment letter. The hearing was scheduled for Wednesday morning at the county building. I showed up early, dressed in clean jeans and a button-up shirt, boots polished. The boardroom was already half full. At one end of the chamber sat Priscilla, flanked by the same woman who trespassed near my dock, and a man with a Bluetooth earpiece who looked like he hadn't ever stepped foot on a lawn. When the chairwoman called the meeting to order, Priscilla was the first to speak. "The Willow Creek HOA has maintained the lake perimeter for years," she said, voice syrupy and measured. "We provided landscaping, pest control, and shoreline erosion prevention. We believe it's in the best interest of the community for the HOA to officially include the surrounding buffer zone." The board asked a few polite questions. Priscilla handed out glossy binders with before and after photos of a cleaned-up shoreline photos that included parts of my own private dock. When it was my turn, I stood and passed out copies of my deed, the original survey, and an annotated map showing every inch of my property. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I have never paid dues to nor signed any agreement with the Willow Creek HOA. They have no legal jurisdiction over my property. What's more, I held up the motion-activated photo from my security camera showing their hired crew walking through my yard at night. They've trespassed multiple times. I filed a report with the sheriff's office and provided photographic evidence. This isn't a stewardship issue. This is an attempted land grab. The Bluetooth man stood up, face red. "Objection. This is character assassination. The HOA has acted in good faith." "No, they haven't. I said they filed this application without my knowledge. They listed me as an impacted party and claimed historical maintenance that never occurred. That's fraud." The room went quiet. The board members flipped through the packet I'd given them. One leaned over to another and whispered something. The chairwoman cleared her throat. "We'll need to investigate this further. Until then, this proposal is suspended." "Mr. Asher, thank you for your documentation." Priscilla didn't even look at me as I walked out. But I wasn't finished. Back at home, I called a land use attorney named Gabriela Mendez. She specialized in HOA overreach cases and had taken down bigger associations than Willow Creek. I sent her everything: documents, videos, the annexation filing, even the landscaper's invoice I'd pulled from the trash after he'd left it behind. 2 days later, Gabriela called me back. "They've crossed several legal lines. You've got them. I'm drafting a cease and desist and a civil claim for property interference and attempted fraud. We'll file next week." That same afternoon, I got another security alert. This time, it was someone dumping a dozen garbage bags at the edge of the lake. I drove down and found a teenager in a Willow Creek polo shirt unloading from a golf cart. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was told by Mrs. Markley that this area was part of the HOA's new community compost initiative. I took a photo of the cart's license plate and recorded the conversation. Then I called the sheriff again. Deputy Brenner met me that evening. After reviewing the footage and seeing the dumped bags, she shook her head. They're escalating, but this is illegal dumping, and if she directed it, we can charge her. She filed the report and said she'd follow up with the DA. By the weekend, word had spread. A few neighbors from outside Willow Creek stopped by, curious about what was going on. One of them, a retired surveyor named Hank, said he'd had similar run-ins with Priscilla when she tried to claim a trail easement that didn't exist. She gets ambitious, he said, but she picked the wrong fight this time. I nodded. She thinks she can paper over the law, but I've got something better, facts. And I wasn't about to let go. 2 days after the compost incident, Gabriella called again. Her tone was sharper this time. They submitted a forged maintenance agreement to the county board. She said, I paused mid-step in my shop, hands still on the power switch for the table saw. What kind of forged? They created a backdated contract between your name and the Willow Creek HOA, claiming you authorized them to manage shoreline improvements in exchange for reduced dues. I leaned against the wall, jaw tightening. That's not even clever. I've never paid dues to anyone. They used a falsified signature. I've already flagged it with the board and filed a complaint with the recorder's office. But this isn't just a civil issue anymore. That's document tampering and impersonation. I didn't say anything for a moment. The air in my lungs felt heavier. Not from fear, from clarity. They're not going to stop unless someone makes them. Gabriella didn't disagree. I've already contacted the district attorney's office. They're reviewing the forged document now. If it passes handwriting analysis, we're looking at felony charges. I hung up and walked outside. The lake was still. The water caught the late afternoon light in long golden streaks. It looked untouched, peaceful, but I knew what was crawling beneath that surface. Now that night, I sat down and wrote a letter to every property owner bordering my land. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't threaten. I just laid out the facts, the trespass incidents, the false filings, and the illegal dumping. I attached copies of the complaint Gabriella had filed with the DA and included my contact info. By the next morning, I had 5 voicemails. One was from Hank, the retired surveyor, who said a friend of his in Willow Creek had been pressured to sign a petition supporting the annexation without being told what it was really about. Another was from a woman named Patrice, whose backyard overlooked the lake from the eastern slope. She sounded shaken. I never approved any of this, she said, and now I'm getting letters from the HOA demanding I pay a shoreline maintenance fee. They're saying it's retroactive to last year. That afternoon, I met her and 3 others in my driveway. They brought envelopes, invoices, and in one case, a threatening letter signed by Director of Compliance, Willow Creek HOA. It warned of liens and legal action if the recipients didn't pay the new fee within 30 days. Gabriella reviewed the documents by phone and confirmed none of it was enforceable. Not just that, it was coordinated fraud. They're manufacturing a paper trail to make the annexation look like a formality. She said, it's a setup. I turned to Patrice. Did anyone from the HOA ever visit your property before this started? She looked embarrassed. About a month ago, someone came by offering shoreline pest control, said it was part of the new environmental initiative. I didn't think anything of it. The man next to her, a retired Marine named Cal, shook his head. They sprayed something near my fence line. I told them to leave, but they said it was already paid for. That was it. They were trying to fabricate a history of maintenance, then bill people later to validate it. I sent Gabriella copies of every letter and invoice. She forwarded them to the DA's office and filed an emergency injunction against the HOA's board. That night, I met with Deputy Brenner again. This is organized, she said, looking over the new reports. False documentation, unauthorized chemical application, fraud. It's going to the state attorney general. What happens next, I asked. We'll need a warrant to search their administrative office. If they've got internal memos or planning documents with your name on them, that's evidence of conspiracy. She left with copies of the letters and promised to keep me updated. 2 mornings later, a cruiser and 2 unmarked vehicles pulled into the Willow Creek HOA office. a converted clubhouse near their tennis courts. The officers went inside. Less than an hour later, they walked out with boxes. Priscilla came out flanked by her lawyer, her face pale and her hands trembling. She didn't look at the cameras recording from a distance. Fair to say the neighborhood grapevine was alive and well. That evening, I got a call from Gabriella. One of the seized boxes contained a printed timeline titled Phase 3 Shoreline Reclamation Plan. Under my name were handwritten notes, non-compliant, resistant, and chillingly apply pressure via neighbors. They were targeting you specifically, she said, trying to turn the neighborhood against you to isolate and push you into compliance. I'm not surprised, I said, but I am furious. They're going to be too. The DA's filing charges tomorrow. Mail fraud, falsification of official records, and conspiracy to commit annexation through deceit. That night, I walked the property line with a flashlight. Not because I expected trouble, but because I needed to see it again. Not just the trees and fence posts, but the space itself, mine, hard-earned, untouched by their nonsense. The next week, the hearing on Gabriella's civil case was scheduled. The courtroom wasn't full, but the front row was stacked with familiar faces. Patrice, Kel, Hank, a few others I didn't know by name, but recognized from the neighborhood. Priscilla sat at the defense table with a visibly annoyed attorney in a navy suit. Gabriella stood with the kind of calm that meant she already knew how it would end. Your Honor, the Willow Creek HOA submitted a fraudulent annexation request to the planning board. They supported this request with forged documents, unauthorized service invoices, and letters falsely claiming jurisdiction over private property. My client never joined this HOA, never authorized maintenance, and never agreed to any shoreline management. The defense attorney tried to pivot. This is a misunderstanding. My client believed the lake was unclaimed and acted in the interest of environmental stewardship. Gabriella didn't even blink. Then why forge a contract? Why submit a maintenance log retroactively with no verified service providers? Why send bills to residents who never consented? The judge reviewed the evidence, flipping slowly through the packets Gabriella had prepared. After 20 minutes, he looked up. The court finds that the Willow Creek HOA acted outside the scope of its charter, engaged in fraudulent activity, and attempted to exert control over private land through deception. The annexation is nullified. Furthermore, the HOA is prohibited from contacting, billing, or accessing Mr. Asher's property in any capacity. He paused. Additionally, this court refers the matter of forged documentation to the district attorney for further criminal prosecution. Outside the courthouse, Gabriella turned to me. They'll try to save face, probably claim they were misled by a rogue board member. I'm not concerned with their spin, I said. I'm concerned with making sure this never happens again. A few days later, the Willow Creek HOA held an emergency election. Priscilla was removed. The rest of the board either resigned or were voted out. A new leadership committee was installed, one that promised transparency and, more importantly, limits. They sent me a letter of apology, framed it, and hung it in the shed. As for the lake, it stayed mine, quiet, untouched, just the way it had always been. And every time I walked the shore, I didn't just see water anymore. I saw the line they tried to cross and the boundary they couldn't erase. The weeks following the courtroom victory were quiet, eerily so. The lake settled into its usual rhythm. The cycas returned in the evenings, and the last of the HOA's nonsense seemed to dissolve. But then, just as I was starting to believe the storm had passed, Gabriella rang with an edge in her voice I hadn't heard before. They've been shredding documents. I leaned against the porch railing, watching a blue heron glide low over the lake. Who? The former Willow Creek Board. County investigators served a subpoena for all HOA financial records from the last 5 years. When they showed up, the office was locked and the paper shredder was still warm. They left behind bags of half-destroyed files. What were they trying to hide? You're not going to like it. Turned out the annexation scheme wasn't just about my lake. The HOA had been quietly collecting special assessment fees from dozens of residents for projects that never happened. Shoreline dredging, pest control, even emergency path lighting that no one had ever seen installed. The money well into 6 figures was being rerouted through a shell landscaping company that didn't exist outside a P.O. box downtown. The name on the account, Priscilla Markley. Gabriella didn't need to spell it out. That's embezzlement. She filed a formal notice with the state's real estate fraud division. By then, the DA had already looped in the Bureau of Investigation. Within 72 hours, agents raided the former HOA president's house and confiscated her electronics. News vans were parked outside her cul-de-sac by dusk. I didn't watch the coverage. I didn't need to see it. Instead, I spent that night with Deputy Brenner at the sheriff's office, giving a detailed statement about the forged filings, the unauthorized landscaping, and the falsified shoreline records. She took it all down, cross-referencing it with the case files now being shared across agencies. "There's a digital trail," she said as she flipped through a folder. "Bank wires, time-stamped emails, even a Zoom recording where she outlines how to neutralize denters. You're in it. She calls you an obstacle with too much paperwork." I let out a dry breath. How poetic. They're charging her with wire fraud, criminal conspiracy, and unlawful access of protected property. That's just the beginning. Over the next month, subpoenas rolled out like thunder. 4 former board members were indicted for conspiracy. 2 others turned state's evidence to avoid prison. It turned out the compost dumping had been ordered to create a pretext for environmental code violations, a manufactured excuse to claim the land was being mismanaged. The prosecutor laid it out clearly during a press conference. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a coordinated attempt to acquire private property under the guise of community improvement and to profit from it. The neighborhood watched in disbelief as the truth unraveled. Dozens of homeowners demanded refunds. Some brought lawsuits. One elderly couple broke down in tears during a community forum, saying they'd paid over $20,000 in bogus fees over the last 3 years. I was invited to speak at that forum. I didn't want to, but Gabriella insisted. They need to hear from someone who pushed back and won. So I stood on a folding stage set up in the park, the lake just barely visible through the trees behind me. "I didn't go looking for a fight," I said, my voice steady. "I just knew what was mine, and I wasn't going to let someone take it with a clipboard and a smile." There were no cheers, no applause, just a long, thoughtful silence. Then Cal stood, arms folded, and gave a single nod. One by one, others followed, not clapping, just standing like a quiet wall of agreement. By summer's end, the Willow Creek HOA was dissolved by court order. Its assets, what remained after restitution, were transferred to a community trust. The new leadership, elected by an emergency neighborhood vote, included none of the previous board members. Gabriella helped structure bylaws to prevent any similar overreach in the future. The county issued a permanent jurisdictional map, publicly confirming that my lake and surrounding acreage were outside the bounds of any HOA authority. They posted it online and filed it with the assessor's office. As for Priscilla, she accepted a plea deal, 5 years probation, 2 years of house arrest, and full repayment of all misappropriated funds. The judge called her actions a betrayal of public trust wrapped in the language of community service. She didn't look at me once during the sentencing. A month later, I removed the motion camera from the oak. I patched the hole in the trunk and stood back, arms crossed, watching the tree take back its space. The lake rippled at the edge of my vision. Patrice stopped by one afternoon with a basket of peaches and a folded letter. "I thought you should see this." It was a handwritten apology from one of the former board members. Not Priscilla, but the one who had originally signed off on the falsified maintenance logs. He admitted he'd been pressured into going along with it, convinced the ends justified the means. He ended it with one sentence. "You reminded me that lines matter." I kept the letter, not because I forgave him, but because it felt like the final stone in the wall I'd been building since the first pink citation showed up on my mailbox. That fall, Cal and I built a bench by the dock. Nothing fancy, just cedar planks and galvanized bolts. We didn't talk much while we worked. When it was done, we sat for a while watching the water. "You know," he said, "she picked the wrong guy to mess with." I nodded. She picked the wrong lake. We didn't laugh. We just sat there surrounded by silence that finally felt earned. The lake, like always, didn't care about HOAS or power plays or forged contracts. It just existed, and now, without threat or trespass, it could stay as it was meant to be, untouched, unclaimed by bureaucratic ambition, and deeply undeniably mine.